This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Steven Universe has one of the most interesting reputations of any cartoon that's released in the past decade. Wait, it's officially over a decade old? Ow. Depending on who you ask, you'll either be told that it's one of the best cartoons ever to grace our screens, that it's impacted the animation industry in so many excellent ways, while on the other side of the spectrum, you'll have a flurry of folks telling you how it's one of the worst cartoons in recent times, that its issues vastly outweigh whatever few minor positives it contains, and had an incredibly negative impact on animation nowadays. Where do I fall in? Well, I wanted to know too. See, because of all this, it's given Steven Universe a pretty bad reputation online. Those who hate it don't like when it gets attention, and those who do like it sometimes feel as if they can't express that without the other side trying to explain to them why they're wrong, and everyone in the middle just being fed up with the discussion. And in a way, I think it's impacted how I view this show. Like, I've made quite a few jokes over the years at Steven Universe's expense. It's a pretty easy punchline at this rate. But it's strange because at one point in time not too long ago, I would have safely said that Steven Universe was my favorite cartoon, ever. Yeah, among my many other obsessions I like to hide from the public, there were a good few years where I was a massive Steven Universe fan. I watched every episode multiple times, knew all the songs, had entire scenes I could recite word for word. Look, I don't show this often, guys, and by don't show often, I mean I never show this, but you want to take a look at one of the first profile pictures I had for this very channel you watch today? And then have like stock gasping. If you zoom in really close, you can even see the Steven that was poorly cropped out so I could color pick the jacket. I wish I could say that was the worst I had, but that would be a lie. Look, do I need to prove it anymore? I loved this show. However, over the years as I got older and newer seasons started to release, there was just something about it that didn't click the same with me, and I never really figured out what that was. Around season 3, it was some Watermelon Island thing, was when I could really feel myself checking out, getting more and more fed up with it. And while I did stick around to the end, even watching the movie in future when they came out, I can't really say that I was all that hyped with the many finales we've received. Certainly not enough to want more of it. Jesus, people, just let a thing end for once. Point being, clearly I felt like something was there at first to obsess so much of my time around consuming its content, particularly in the show's early years. Which is weird, because if there's one thing that both of these entirely conflicting sides can agree on, it's that Season 1 is pretty weak. I always thought that Season 1 was the strongest, only to slowly dip in quality over time, but then again, I was like 14 when I watched it, so perhaps I was simply clouded by childhood nostalgia, and that the series' eventual change was actually for the better, and I just couldn't handle it because change is scary. I guess we'll never know. Unless I watch the show again. Wait a minute! That's what you're watching right now! So I went back and watched all 53 episodes of Steven Universe Season 1 for the first time in around 6 or 7 years, to answer the question that has plagued a generation. Was Steven Universe bad from the start? At first I was going to make a single video on the entire show to track what I believe to be its gradual downfall, but then I thought about it more and realized that this here, the quality of the beginning of the series, was really what I wanted to get to the bottom of. Especially because a lot of Steven Universe fans genuinely believe that if you want to check out the show that you should simply skip a majority of its first season. Yeah, that shares a vote of confidence right there. But if you guys do end up enjoying this analysis and want to see me go over the rest of the series, I'd probably just do like Season 2, 3, 4, 5, the movie and future in one single mega video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that and I'll heavily consider it. Also, subscribe. No relevance. Would just be nice. Steven Universe was created by one Rebecca Sugar, who worked as a board artist on Adventure Time, with her being known for many of the most beloved episodes of that series as well as the music. She had started developing the show as far back as 2009, for a program Rob Sorcher launched where the company was looking for talent, presumably from inside the company, to come up with new cartoon ideas for the network, which resulted in 6 of these pilots eventually being released online. Of the 6, only 3 eventually became full series: Clarence OKKO, at the time known as Liquid Plaza Turbo, and of course, Marsafar Steven Universe. Going back to this pilot with the series having long ended is so bizarre. All the pieces are clearly there, even hinting at future plot points that would eventually find itself in the main show, but it just looks so strange. Steven and Amethyst look relatively similar, Garnet just has her hair done, but Jesus Christ, they took a complete 180 with Pearl's design. The backgrounds too have much more detail, with the whole thing just looking way darker compared to the bright pastel colors they eventually went with. Apparently the art style was changed due to them trying to simplify it in a way that would make it more adaptable to board artists, and I gotta say that decision was certainly for the better. While this art style is clearly more in line with Rebecca Sugar's other work from around then, I have to say the new style just looks better, especially for the target demographic. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think the show would have been anywhere near as iconic if it looked like this. Other than the visuals, however, the writing and tone is pretty one-to-one with how the series would end up upon being greenlit. The whole premise for the pilot was even used later in the show itself. But I do enjoy how simple things are here. The Gems get back from a mission, and Amethyst gives Steven this little trinket which he later finds out can send him back in time to fulfill a singular purpose, and so he, of course, uses it for comebacks. Yet by the end, he finds a way to use this ability to aid the Gems against a monster, redeeming himself. It's a great pilot in my opinion, certainly a lot better than some of the other pilots that came alongside it. I can completely see why it was eventually picked up for a full series. It stands itself apart so much. Compared to a lot of these other pilots which were aiming for your usual Cartoon Network random and wacky shtick, Steven Universe gives off this super slow, relaxing vibe at first, before spearheading you right into action at the end. With all the characters feeling super fleshed out in just 7 minutes, the world feels lived in. There's a certain charm about it that's hard to describe.
You know that, right? You're a big joke!
I especially love Steven's expressions. The little stress lines they give him at times do a great job at showing how fucking desperately he wants to be part of the Crystal Gems. All of this is to say, I think this is a really good pilot for the show. I can see why the studio may have been hesitant at first, given this is a show for boys aged 6 to 11 where 3 of the main 4 characters are women, but I can also see exactly how this pilot would have won them over, if only they knew back then what they were in for. So, by the time I find Steven Universe, they were well into the 2nd season. I've talked about this many times in the past, but there was a long period where I was very much ashamed to like cartoons, and so understandably let this show go right past my radar. I think the only time I ever stopped to watch a full episode out of curiosity was when they did the Uncle Grandpa crossover. I hadn't seen a single episode from either of these. I don't know why I made this my first experience with both, but that all changed one day. And I'm sure I'm gonna be judged for this, but my first time ever watching Steven Universe was through reaction videos. I'll just put the bag over my face now. I was looking for episodes of Sonic Boom, which was new at the time, and because I didn't have a computer and didn't know how to pirate stuff on my phone, I had to settle for the next best thing, which was watching somebody on YouTube watch the episode. After a while, the reactionist started watching Steven Universe episodes too, and I figured, hey, why not? No one can judge me for watching this while I'm on a phone. And so for the entirety of Season 1 and for a majority of Season 2, I was watching the show really zoomed out with a guy talking over the whole thing. And I loved it. So this'll be interesting for me. My first time ever truly watching Steven Universe on its own. Was Season 1 really that bad for both sides to be in agreement over it? Let's find out. Steven Universe stars Steven Universe. Hold the phone. He lives in the coastal town of Beach City, residing just outside of the rest of civilization in this little house built into a mountain. Despite this, his dad Greg doesn't live with him, instead sleeping inside his van like a true gamer. Now, Steven is rather under the guidance of the Crystal Gems, 3 warriors who were allies of Steven's mother Rose, who gave up her physical form to have him, leaving him as this never-before-seen human gem hybrid. And so with no idea what he's capable of, Steven has to train with the gems to learn how to unlock and control his mother's powers, while battling monsters alongside Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. I think the first episode of the series does a pretty stellar job at introducing you to this world and the characters, while hinting at more going on underneath the surface, because in terms of what's going on, it's fairly minimal. Your average monster of the week formula where a new foe shows up every week for the gems to fight and Steven to do Steven stuff. It perfectly sets you up for what's in store, introducing the characters as well as giving Steven one-on-one scenes with each of the gems to see how all their mindsets seem to differ, with Steven just being stuck in the middle of it all, being steered every which way, while also trying to prove himself as a valuable member of the team. There's also a great deal of foreshadowing in here that I completely forgot about, such as how when Steven opens his freezer you can see a strange glowing ring, which you wouldn't know the payoff for until all the way into episode 7. I love seeing junk like that in cartoons, makes it feel like the writers had a plan for all this. One of the main criticisms towards the first season of Steven Universe was how much more episodic in nature it was, but as I'm going to get into later, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But there was still a lot of continuity present from episode 1. Another one of the main criticisms of season 1 of Steven Universe is Steven Universe. A lot of folks were not a fan of Steven during the beginning of the show, with most finding him to be an annoying nuisance whoever only seems to hinder the gems without adding much to the team, at least not enough for them to warrant keeping him around. Which is strange because I personally never saw it that way. I think what prevents Steven from veering too far into being an unlikable protagonist, especially compared to a lot of other shows that suffer from this very issue, is that they know when to drop the act and have him see situations for how they are, but also they know when to let him, just be a kid. The guy is 13 years old. Are you really gonna sit there and tell me you weren't annoying when you were 13? Unless, you're a 13-year-old watching this video, in which case, you're cool. I mean, that goes without saying. It's all a balancing act. For as much time as Steven is childish or annoying, there's just as much time dedicated to showing his other character traits, like how caring he is or his emotional intelligence. It's even something the show itself tries to acknowledge at one point, and because of that, it comes off more like you're watching this kid grow up.
I can't believe it. I'm so annoying.
I think a pretty important line to draw when it comes to not making your character come off too annoying is asking yourself the question, are they being naive here, or just being stupid? I think a really lazy way to write a character is to just say, oh, they're the stupid one, because that could mean so many things. Why are they stupid? Is it ignorance, their upbringing? It may seem really lame to try and add depth to a trait that in concept is so silly and unserious, but it's more so from a writer's perspective. It's why I think a character like Patrick from SpongeBob works so well in the early seasons compared to the later episodes. Early on, he was this chill guy who spends all his time just lounging around, but when he's asked for advice by the naive SpongeBob, he wants to act like he knows everything. The comedy comes from him thinking he's some mentor figure, and SpongeBob being so gullible to accept what he has to say as fact. It isn't just two stupid friends do stupid thing because they're stupid. And generally, I think Steven Universe accomplishes this with his character pretty well. Generally. There are a few episodes here where I do straight up just not like him. I think Together Breakfast is probably his worst episode in the whole show, purely from Steven's character point of view. He makes this breakfast and wants to enjoy it with all the gems because they're always too busy to do stuff with him. What do you know, they're too busy to do stuff with him, and so he chases them around the inside of the temple for them all to enjoy the meal together. Doesn't sound so bad, and actually can make you sympathize for him in a way. But they fumble pretty hard in just making him straight up ignorant towards his surroundings. Like when Garnet is perfectly burning this thing that she told him about at the start of the episode, going over how important it is to get rid of it, and so when he sees her doing what she said she'd be doing, naturally, he starts screaming to take her focus away from it. And even after being told by the other gems and Garnet herself to leave, he continues screaming about his dumb fucking waffles or whatever. But see, this episode, overall, is merely an outlier. In most other episodes, while sure he's always portrayed to be intrigued by the gem stuff and expresses his disappointment when he isn't allowed to partake, it all feels like natural kid dialogue. You can understand why he feels that way and why sometimes he tries to push his luck. The whole season is really about him proving himself to the gems, and so it makes sense why he'd go against the rotors at times. Another reason I see a lot of folks saying he's annoying is because of his voice, and I think I might actually have an unpopular opinion here about the matter. Me? An unpopular opinion? I know it's crazy. But if anything, I actually think Steven's voice gets more annoying as the series goes on. At least during the first half of season 1 he sounds like a kid, because the voice actor was a kid. But as it goes on, it sounds like he's trying to put on a more squeaky voice more and more to sound younger, and as a result it just sounds like it's trying way too hard to be cutesy or whatever, and that definitely got more annoying for me over time.
Hey, Lars. Just give me 3 donuts.
This can't be happening! This has to be a dream! Lars! Lars! Please tell me I'm dreaming!
Oh, but I don't really have anything against squares. I like all basic shapes.
I also wasn't a fan of when his voice actor was clearly going through puberty, so his voice gets super high-pitched and squeaky. But I get it, you can't stop his voice from aging. Or can you? But while I initially found this pretty annoying, I did find that certain scenes of later episodes were instead made stronger with Steven's ever-changing voice. One of Zach Callison's strongest moments in the show, in my opinion, is in Rose's Scabbard, where after some emotional junk that I'll get into later happens, Steven is desperately chasing after Pearl, not understanding why she's upset or if she's mad at him, and his squeaky, puberty-filled voice really excels the performance here. It sounds like his vocal cords are gonna rip out at certain points with how much he yells, but it adds so much to the struggle.
Pearl! Did I do something wrong? You gotta tell me!
This is all coincidental that the episode's landed at this point in his voice changing, sure, but I still really love it here, that you can hear the character going through this change, and it's reflective of how much more mature he begins to act as the season goes on. So all in all, I like Steven. I think he's one of the best ever kid characters ever written in a cartoon. Season 1 at least. Next up, we've got Garnet, the leader of the Crystal Gems. She's fine. I'm pretty sure that Garnet is like the most popular among the 3 main gems, because she's so awesome and calm and collected and cooler. But, I don't know, I never really thought much of her. Probably because she barely says anything. Yeah, with a character whose whole trait is to keep words to a minimum, I never really find myself becoming all that attached to Garnet. She's mainly just used as a central role model for Steven, or at least is the gem whose approval is sought after the most, even by the others. She doesn't get a whole lot of development throughout the first season. A lot of her character here is that she's mysterious. And while she definitely becomes more of a standout character later on, hell even with the season 1 finale, I never personally cared for her throughout the first season. Makes coming back to it kinda hard now because it barely feels like she's there half the time. That isn't to say there's no standout moments with her. I mainly like how despite sparingly using her for anything of much importance, when they do it's generally to defend Steven against the others when they're insulting or criticizing him. You get this vibe that she really cares and loves for the kid but just doesn't express it all the time. Her calm nature also makes the moments when she does lose her shit all the more impactful, like in Mirror Gem when Steven hits her away, knocking her glasses off. You can really feel the tension since we're not used to seeing her act this way towards him. One of my favorite episodes featuring Garnet, one of my favorite episodes of the whole series, would have to be Future Vision, where Garnet lets Steven know that she has the ability to see into the future, to pick the best outcome imaginable. This completely bricks his brain as he starts to overwhelm himself by thinking of all the ways his seemingly innocuous actions can harm him. Throughout the series, we always see the gems refrain from letting Steven in on what's going on behind the scenes, so it makes you wonder why she would do this to him, especially since she has the ability to know the risk of that. And it leads to one of the best moments in the whole show.
I took a risk at your expense. There was a chance you'd understand this and we'd be closer. I see so many things that can hurt you. I should never have let one of them be me.
I understand and in a way appreciate why scenes like this are seldom done with Garnet. It adds to the impact given how rare it is. But I guess I just never really cared much about this kind of archetype in the first place, the silent but deadly powerhouse. And Estelle is most definitely the weakest voice actor on the show, which doesn't help. Being a singer and not really a voice actress is very obvious, with how awkwardly some of these lines are delivered, but in a way I suppose that adds to the character, I guess. It somewhat fits, but I don't think it was intentional. So overall, Garnet mostly remains as a character who more often than not has me like, that was cool, I guess. I fucking hate Amethyst, though. Amethyst is the chill one of the group, having a pretty lax approach to their missions and overall lifestyle, being this big slob who lives in filth. She's mostly used for comic relief, with most of her jokes just being, "She's gross," or "Wow, that was rude." And after a while, it just gets tiring. Scratch that, it gets tiring after episode 1. I can understand why some people would like her, but I personally just can't deal with her half the time. Which is alright, because next to Garnet, she gets very little focus throughout season 1. I can only really think of 3 or 4 episodes where she's the star, and more often than not, it results in some pretty mixed ones. Like, there are episodes where I like Amethyst. There are even a couple where I love Amethyst. But there's also just as many where I fucking hate her. I'm probably not alone on this, but I think the best Amethyst episode of season 1 has gotta be Tiger Millionaire. Yeah, no, that's a joke. My favorite Amethyst episode would definitely have to be On the Run, where she decides to show Steven where she came from, that being a hole inside of a mountain surrounded by a bunch of other holes, revealing that she was made on Earth unlike the other gems who came from space. They do an excellent job of building up this creepy, mysterious atmosphere around what we find out is known as the kindergarten, with Amethyst being just vague enough for you to suddenly start questioning who she even is or what her purpose was.
Stop. And we shut this place down so the Earth would be safe from parasites like me! Amethyst!
Pearl comes in to take Steven away, scolding Amethyst for even showing him this place. Her obviously not understanding that this is where Amethyst's insecurity stemmed from, where the place she was made from only ever being referred to as a mistake, with Pearl eventually recognizing it and the two of them having one of the rare moments in the show where they have a sweet little heartfelt moment together. It's really interesting getting to have more depth of the character, who before had only ever really been presented as a slob. Still don't like her though. Yeah, no, for all these good moments with Amethyst, there's just as many where I can't stand her, which I think mostly comes from her actions never truly being addressed by the other characters in any meaningful way. Everybody talks about this scene, but that's because it's just so awful. But there's an episode where Amethyst and Greg start to hang out, which we later find out happened once many years ago, where Greg starts to lean into her bad habits of just sitting around doing nothing all day. And when he finally realizes he's been neglecting his son and falling into the same patterns again, she starts to torment him by turning into Rose Quartz, aka his fucking dead girlfriend and the mother of his child. Pretty bad, right? But that's not why it sucks. If anything, I think it's a great scene on its own, highlighting how despite being the good guys of the series, the gems have the ability to do terrible actions with the intent of hurting people. But it's the way they treat it afterwards that makes things fall apart. Like, the whole thing that stops her is that Steven walks in them, making Amethyst run away ashamed. But like, she only stopped because she was caught. This is also implied to have happened at least once before, so it's not like she felt remorse then. Then in the following scene, everything is all hunky-dory because she cleaned his storage unit for him. Wonderful. She can barely even face him, no sorry or anything. I get it, kid show and all. But it's not like the series doesn't tackle more serious subjects frequently, and it's not like there's no sense of continuity. At least if that were the case, I would understand them being required to patch this up before the episode is over, and I get the thought process of this, like her actions show she cares and all. But there's a clear discrepancy between these two actions. I don't think one makes up for the other. Amethyst is my least favorite character of the main four, and even then, it's not like she's abhorrent or anything. I guess I was just never a big fan of this kind of character. See, I feel like someone's favorite crystal gem says a lot about them. So if you know anything about me, you'd be right in assuming that I think Pearl is the best gem of all. No contest. Hey, what can I say? I like this archetype. She's basically just a female Jeff from Clarence. And hey, the writers evidently agreed with me here, because fucking half of season 1 is dedicated to Pearl. She gets way more attention in starring episodes than any other gem. And I mean, I'm not complaining. Pearl is the neat and tidy one of the group. She was Rose's longest and most loyal ally, and therefore cares a great deal for her. Always reminiscing about how amazing of a person she was, how she saw the beauty in everything. And because of that, I think a lot of people kind of brush Pearl off for being kind of neurotic. And they're right, but I don't know, I like it, maybe that says more about me. As I said before, Pearl gets the most attention out of any of the main three gems, which seems to be more from the fact that because she sees herself as being so intelligent and cares greatly about gem history, she's always willing and wanting to teach Steven about all this amazing stuff. Much like every other character in this goddamn show, a lot of her more annoying personality traits are a direct result of her insecurities. Pearl feeling empty without Rose in her life now.
Look at them. They're a mess without her guidance. Directionless, pathetic, clinging things. It's going to be okay, Garnet.
Sure.
I do really enjoy how nobody just is in this series. There's always some event that leads to them being the way they are. Coach Steven is a good example of this, where she gets jealous over the fact that Garnet would rather fuse with Amethyst over her for one of their missions, becoming jealous when Steven starts looking up to how strong they are, or they're trying to show him that there are other ways to be strong aside from just physically. And when all seems lost and she's about to be defeated by the very thing this insecurity stems from, Steven gives her the motivation to prove herself, taking down this giant woman through her intelligence alone. Pearl sees herself as lost and broken, and this is the causation for why she acts the way she does. There's more I could say about her, but that would mean going into some episodes that I'd rather see for later. But the point to all this is, I really do enjoy a majority of our main characters. Like 2 out of 4, that's like 50%. The strangest thing about Season 1 of Steven Universe is that it doesn't feel like a single season. Instead, they could have easily classified it as 2 separate ones entirely, and it would have made a lot more sense, with it coming in at a whopping 53 episodes. No other season of the series came even close to that. It's insane how big pickups were back then. Sonic Boom has 104 goddamn episodes, yet that's somehow considered only 2 seasons. Now saying that, when you get to episode 26, there's a very climatic feeling to it all, with the following episodes taking the show in what for the most part feels like an entirely new direction. So I think it'd be fitting to separate them so it's easier to discuss. I think it's important to remember that 2013 was a time before streaming was the most common way for most people to consume content. A time before a million different streaming services clawing for your eyes and attention. So understandably, Cartoon Network were a little weary about this serialized story for their new cartoon aged at voice 6 to 11. It's evident that a large chunk of Steven Universe had been planned out from the get-go. So it's clear there was always the intention to give it a grander story than what was initially presented. But airing on television, there was no way they could predict what episode somebody would be starting with. You don't want a kid checking out your show for the first time only to be dropped into the middle of an action-packed story where you're already expected to know the characters, so I get completely why they must have demanded Season 1 have a more episodic focus. It just makes the most sense. Although I think the crew, no, I'm not calling them the Crewniverse, had some super clever workarounds for this by giving the first half of Season 1 this ongoing underlying theme of Steven trying to learn how to use his powers. The plot can be as episodic as it needs to be, but as long as a majority of them feature Steven learning how to use his powers in some way, then there's at least some illusion of an ongoing story. Then once the show started to become more popular, I imagine it gave the crew more leverage to start leaning into a more serialized approach. Especially since Cartoon Network at least now has a batch of episodic stuff that can be aired out of order. I know a lot of people bitch about this aspect of the first season, but I get it. I would occasionally catch Steven Universe on the TV with my little cousin, and I can't imagine what he thought of the show, because they'd be airing random episodes from the cluster arc of Season 2, then they'd go back to early Season 1 where they have their different designs. This is not a good show to air out of order, so I'm thankful there's at least some way for kids to view it now in the way it was intended. Is what I would be saying if Warner Brothers weren't a bunch of hacks. I was watching the season on HBO Max for this video, oh sorry, I mean just Max, to see that it only contained 49 of the episodes from Season 1, with the other 4 coming after that jumping right into Season 2, but still labeling it as Season 1. Then, for Season 2, it started with the fucking Uncle Grandpa crossover, and then goes into a couple random tiny episodes that were left out of the first season, before then Season 2 continues as normal. Who is in charge of this? I can't imagine it's that hard to just go on Wikipedia and find the episode listings. This is for some reason a very common problem with certain streaming services. Like for example, The Fairly OddParents was recently added to Netflix for some reason, even though Paramount Plus exists. But they say that show came out in 2005. despite it correctly listing the right year a few months prior. But that one has this god-awful description of, anything's bound to happen when you've got fairy godparents, as 10-year-old Timmy Turner discovers when he wishes for cool parents. Did we watch the same show? I know it's even more blasphemous, calling Timmy a not-so-average kid. Timmy is an average kid. Boy, I sure hope somebody got fired for that blunder. Wait, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, Steven Universe. So now if somebody's watching the show for the first time through HBO Max, they'll suddenly get super confused as the gems flip-flop between their old and new designs, which I think was already a problem for Cartoon Network as they frequently aired episodes out of order. Doesn't streaming make content consumption so much easier? But if anything, I actually really like this slower approach to Season 1, starting off with a bunch of episodic episodes. A big pet peeve I have is when a show tries to cram in as much as they can into the first couple episodes, either due to them wanting to get to the juicy bits as quick as possible, or simply because of poor storytelling abilities. But Steven Universe starts things off super simple. There's an ongoing issue, sure, the gems are having to defeat whatever corrupted monster of the week is threatening the world, but we don't get context as to why they're doing this or what these monsters even are, until way later, which is great for rewatches, as it suddenly recontextualizes everything. That's not to somehow justify every episode of Season 1, because there certainly are a few here that I'm just not a fan of whatsoever. Like, I think Beach Party is just a terrible episode that adds nothing to the show whatsoever, simply featuring Steven inviting one of the families in town over for the titular beach party, to improve relations between the townsfolk and the gems. But this mainly consists of a dumb little volleyball game, before they have to team up and combine their strengths to take down a monster together. The idea is fine and all, but I think one of Steven Universe's weakest aspects is the comedy. And this is an episode that's mainly focused around the silly shenanigans between the gems and some random family. But you know, there's 53 of them, it's not like they're all gonna be winners. It's like I always say, if every episode were perfect, we wouldn't have endless online discussion about their quality. I think the best episodes here are the ones which take a regular everyday adventure and put a spin on it using Steven's magical powers. For example, So Many Birthdays is seemingly your average kid is self-conscious about getting older plot, but it starts to get interesting once Steven's gem starts shapeshifting him based on how he views himself, getting older and older until the brink of death. Not only is it a good episode on its own, but it also builds upon a plot point from all the way back in episode 6 where Steven learns how to shapeshift. Now that isn't to say that any episode that doesn't have to do with Steven's powers is automatically bad or anything. There's just one well later into the season which features Steven just having a horror movie night with the town conspiracy nut Ronaldo, and employees of the donut store he frequents Lars and Sadie. And Steven barely plays a part in any of it. It mainly focuses on the relationship between Lars and Ronaldo, with Lars being somebody hyper-focused with coming off cool, while Ronaldo is just content being himself. That self is annoying, but still. This is one of my favorite scenes of the whole show, and it doesn't even feature Steven or any of the gems at all.
Why do you care so much about what other people think?
You wouldn't say that if you knew what other people say about you!
It's simple and has nothing to do with the overall story of the show, but it's impactful, you know, it feels real, and adds a lot of depth and history to the people of this city that Steven is protecting. I mean, why should we care about the gems protecting Beach City if we barely even know who lives there? I actually think I've got a viewpoint here that the average Steven Universe fan might disagree with, but I like the tiny episodes. Sometimes more than the regular gem stuff. The fandom has this big resentment towards how much of the series is focused on Steven interacting with random citizens of Beach City, whether it be the mayor, or business owners, or cool kids. They'd rather it focus on Steven doing cool stuff with the gems, but I personally think that, in Season 1 at least, the tiny episodes are a necessity, as they contrast Steven's human life with his gem life, and how hard it is for him to try and mix those. For how much of an asshole he is, I think Lars might be one of my favorite characters just because of how much time they spend with him, showcasing how much of a prick he is and how he affects the people around him. Lars and the cool kids is another stellar one. Your average episode about Lars not wanting to be seen as lame in front of these cool kids, and is embarrassed by Steven who's just being himself, only for him to realize that nobody is impressed by his vain attempt to be cool, and instead, they respect Steven much more for just being Steven.
Sounds like it's time to buckle up.
Quit being lame, Steven.
Hey man, there's nothing lame about seatbelt safety.
Lars still can't accept that the only person messing up his chances with these guys is himself, resulting in him blowing up at Steven in the end for the moss his mother used to raise absorbing the others. Which causes one of the few times in the whole series where Steven actually gets pissed the fuck off. Just look at his eyes.
What do you know about my mom? I didn't even get to know my mom! But I do know she saw beauty in everything, even in jerks like you!
They kind of go back and forth on this a lot. Again, because the show is trying to be episodic, there's a lot of moments where Lars realizes how much of an asshole he is, and then goes right back to being an asshole again by the next episode. But again, I can imagine the mandates from Cartoon Network were still pretty strict this early on, so a massive character change like this probably wasn't on the table at this point. But again, I don't mind because it gives us all these great moments. When revisiting the season, I completely forgot about Joking Victim. There's a bunch of random Season 1 episodes that escaped my mind after watching them, but upon seeing it again, I realized this is one of the best of the season. Again, very basic plot that's been done time and time again. Lars gets injured on the job, forcing Sadie to bring on Steven in order to pick up all the slack. For the past 20 episodes, there's been a very are they, aren't they approach to Lars and Sadie's relationship. You can't really tell if they are or were a thing. And here's where we get some context. That Sadie does truly care about him and might like him, but when the two try to do something nice for him, only to see that he wasn't injured at all, and instead hanging out with other guys and girls, it breaks her heart to realize that she isn't as important to him as he is to her. It's nothing groundbreaking, but the expressions and the way it's paced and boarded and voice acted adds to the emotion tenfold. I just like how these episodes follow along a theme of Steven trying to learn how to use his powers and use them to protect the town, but they still stand on their own, whereas episodes later in the show all blend together for me. Like, the final season of Steven Universe just exists as a fucking blur in my mind. And that's fine and all, the show is leaning way more into serialization around that time, but I just enjoy how nice and quaint this first half of Season 1 is. And there's even a little bit of continuity foreshadowed in here too. When Steven later finds a VHS tape and needs a player, he immediately goes to Sadie, because in this episode she had to train him using an employee training tape. I love little details like that. Everything changes with episode 25, however. Like I said, it really feels like it was done with the approach of this being a mid-season finale, with massive events unfolding that would change the course of the series forever. In Mirror Gem, Pearl gives Steven a magic mirror that can show him different events from Gem history. However, over time it starts trying to communicate with him to the utter shock of the crystal gems. Steven can't help but feel like there's something here that he's not being let in on. And so for the first major time, Steven actively goes against the wishes of the gems to figure out the truth for himself.
He wants to be with me!
You can really feel the tension here with Steven running away to find out what's happening as fast as possible before the gems catch up with him. It's almost like it signifies Steven desperately trying to escape this episodic loop that is his everyday, as what follows is without a doubt the biggest moment in the series up until this point. As it turns out, another gem had been trapped inside the mirror, and the weirdest part of all, the gems knew she was in there the whole time. It's later implied this was because the gem would go back to Homeworld and reveal there were others living on Earth, which would result in Homeworld coming down to destroy them all, but for the time being it really puts into question these mentors Steven has been surrounding himself with, as Lapis walks away, only leaving him with this.
Don't trust them, Steven. Goodbye.
It makes you question everything you've seen. If you've really been following along the good guys this whole time. You have, but the question is intriguing nonetheless. And you find out in the second part, Ocean Gem, that the truth is a little more complicated than that.
Gems shouldn't fight each other.
We're always fighting gems, actually.
What?
Oh, how do I put this?
All those monsters we fight used to be just like us, right, Pearl?
Yes.
I love how they don't explain this in any episode before now. It's something that you may have not originally thought about, but becomes super obvious once it's explained to you. This is when the entire season shifts, when it starts to become way more serialized. Steven helps Lapis go home and that's it. Homeworld could now be coming for the crystal gems, or they could not. We don't know. This allows them to still have episodic stuff, while having the tease of something more going on in the background. But the very next episode, Houseguest, opens up right where the last left off, letting you know that the ongoing story is going to come into play more from this point on. I forgot a lot of these episodes weren't from Season 2, honestly. And while they're not all gems, there are still a lot of great standalone episodes here, although that definitely is not the focus anymore. One of my favorite moments from all of Steven Universe is what they do with Pearl from this point on, where all these seemingly disparate plot threads come together and you're finally given context as to what it all means. Early on in the show, Steven gets this pink lion. It gravitates towards him, and so we occasionally see him hanging around it in certain episodes. But then they started doing more. 3 to be exact. All labeled in a way that would make you think they're part of some trilogy. But when you watch them, they all seem kinda unrelated. The first is Steven getting his lion, the second is Lion showing Steven some secret weapons room that he can activate, and the third shows Lion letting him inside his Mian, revealing that Lion belonged to his mother Rose, with Steven finding a strange little pocket dimension inside his Mian, retrieving a VHS tape in there she left for him, which leads into him watching it with Sadie like I said before. On their own, they all work well, especially the ending to Lion 3, which gives us our first time of being able to actually see and hear Rose talking to Steven, which in and of itself makes going back to the episode where Steven unlocks Rose's room in the temple more impactful, as the little random whale inside there shared the same voice actress. But when you get all the way to episode 45, all this stuff is brought up again, but this time in how it relates to Pearl. Pearl is extremely excited to show Steven his mother's secret armory, boasting about how Rose kept it hidden from everybody except for her.
Welcome to Rose's secret armory.
Whoa. I've been here before.
What?
She's stunned to see that Steven might know more about how to use this place than her, and is shocked to find out that Lion in fact belonged to Rose, something she never knew about, causing her whole worldview to shatter, to know that Rose kept secrets from her too, with her running away not even being able to face Steven. It's a really heartbreaking moment, especially because Steven hasn't even really done anything wrong or know how to console her, because he's the reason Rose isn't around anymore, which leads to, in my opinion, the best interaction of the whole series and cements this as my favorite of the entire show.
Everything I ever did, I did for her. Now she's gone, but I'm still here. Sometimes, I wonder if she can see me through your eyes. What would she think of me now?
Well, I think you're pretty great.
The lighting, the tone, the looser expressions, the lack of any real music until the end, and when it comes in it's this really somber but grandiose bittersweet tune. And when they're riding off in the end, Pearl's just blankly looking forward, and then down at Steven. It's this truly amazing setup and payoff that I don't think the series has ever come close to even matching since. It's why I don't mind the approach they have of everything in the show needing to be from Steven's point of view. A complaint that started popping up more and more as the series went on is how we don't see anything that Steven doesn't see. Aside from a few gags or a line or two before and after he walks into frame, but this is Steven's universe, so we as the audience only ever follow him around. And while later on it does become a bit tedious, with the epilogue series devoting an entire episode to this criticism, where Steven can't comprehend events happening without him being present, I at least think that in Season 1, it works well for the narrative they're building. You as the audience know as much about the gems as Steven, that being fuck all. So as the season does progress, it's almost like we're learning alongside the kid. Everything new for us is new for him too. And with Lapis warning him not to trust any of them, it only adds to the suspicion. Because yeah, we really don't know a lot about them beyond what little info they decide to let Steven in on. So it makes it all the more effective when Steven does manage to learn a bit, especially without their knowledge. Like when he overhears them talking about what's really going on. That they're scared. Lapis has gone back to Homeworld, and as we learn in episode 36, more gems are starting to come to Earth, and none of them really know why. This is when we're introduced to Peridot, but she doesn't really play much of a role in Season 1, and a lot of her character quirks aren't yet in place, but I think not showing that much does a better job of making her come off as threatening. You know, compared to the epic, wholesome, small, angry girl that she's later defined to be. Now, none of this is to say that the series is completely serialized from this point on. A majority of these are still standalone episodes, but it's never as if they forget what's going on. For example, when following Steven around doing this tiny nonsense, we'll still see the gems pass by trying to figure out what to do with these little homeworld contraptions coming down, or talking about what to do about Peridot. Even in minor ways, which I like a lot. For example, you notice that over the course of the season, Steven is reading a bunch of books and discussing them with Connie. I thought it was weird to focus on it at first until they remind you that way back in a previous episode, there's a joke where Steven disobeys the gems and gets grounded from TV, so of course you'd start reading more. Super small detail, but it's all a very clever way to keep continuity while not having every episode be a major story event. And it's not perfect, you know, when it works, and when it doesn't. Like, remember when Steven went inside Lion's Mane and found the VHS tape? Well, it takes him like 10 episodes after that to actually bother pulling out the scabbard in there for the Pearl episode, just because the plot demanded it. But if this was such a big deal to either Steven or Pearl, you think she'd be like, fucking hell, pull everything out, I want to see what's in there. Because, as we later find out in Season 3, one of the things in there is another crystal gem. I don't think we even find out what a lot of this stuff is by the end of the show, so hey, that's fun. But generally, I think the season's strongest aspect with its story isn't the homeworld stuff, it isn't even the crystal gem stuff and their backstories. Instead, I think the strongest aspect of Season 1 that puts it above all the others in my mind is that it's the only season of the entire show to fully flesh out and realize the character arc they set up. With this being the longest season by double the episodes, there's so much room to breathe, whereas the show would later feel as if it's speeding along, desperately trying to get to the conclusion in fear of cancellation. True story, watch my short. Season 1, on the other hand, takes this super slow approach to Steven's character, where things will be picked up and dropped off and revisited again whenever natural. Before the Lapis stuff, we have an episode dedicated to Steven learning how to replicate Rose's healing tears or else Amethyst will die. And while he doesn't exceed in the way expected, he does later find out by the end of it that he has healing spit, which comes into play later in Ocean Gem, when he heals Lapis so she'll return the ocean and go back home. Not only is that a great callback, but they go even further with it to build upon Steven's training. He can't just do it on command now, well done. It's something that he still has to be able to work towards. In the very next episode, we see Steven's dad having a broken leg over the events of Ocean Gem, and despite Steven being able to do it just fine with Lapis, he can't seem to heal his dad's leg. Which is terrible because there's this massive geode that's on the brink of breaking, which would cause catastrophic events to unfold across the world. But as we later find out, Greg's leg is fine. Steven did heal it first try, but Greg lied about it so he would be able to spend more time with his son, which he's getting to do less and less the more he goes on these gem adventures. But that innocent goal is undermined by the fact that it got in Steven's head. He really can't use his healing powers anymore. It's an excellent way of taking your generic episode about someone lying about an injury, a plot they've literally done already this season, a plot most would probably cry about being filler, and makes it important by still having the events of it contribute to the overall theme of the season, of Steven having to learn how to control his powers and grow. And while they do eventually fix the problem through other means, his healing powers don't come back. He once again has to learn how to get that confidence back. This culminates in probably my second favorite episode of the entire series, The Test, where the gems accidentally reveal to Steven that all the way back in episode 3, when he messed up one of the missions through his usual goofy Steven self, that it didn't matter as they were merely using it as a test to see if he was ready to go on missions. A test which he failed. And so despite being so long ago and not being really relevant anymore, Steven begs the gems to give him a new test. A hard one. I love Pearl's line saying that he doesn't really need it anymore, that he's come so far, but he still wants it anyway. Showing that the idea of him failing is so overbearing that he can't even realize that he's since then exceeded what any test would require from him. So we see him go through a dungeon comprised of 3 rooms, and at the very end where it seems like Steven is gonna fail and get crushed, he finds out the most troubling news of all. It was rigged. The gems never put him in any real danger and that there was no way for him to lose. From Steven's point of view, this only adds to his belief that the gems don't think he's capable, that he's still just a kid and they can't rely on him. And just when he's about to blow up and yell at them for tricking him, he overhears this.
The point is that he's come so far. He can make Rose's bubble, and he's pulled out Rose's shield twice. We have to give him another success. He can't lose his confidence like that again.
We're bad at this.
What?
He realizes that not only did they do this for his own mental benefit, to stop focusing on his past failures, but in a way that the gems are also doing this for themselves. They're broken without their leader and don't know what to do, and so Steven lies. He doesn't admit that he knew it was fake for their confidence. He'll let them have a small but meaningful victory in a time where everything else is uncertain. One of the best moments in the whole show in my opinion, and it's contrasted greatly against how defiant Steven starts becoming in this second half, with him being much more willing to argue and talk back to the gems when he knows he's in the right.
Yes, Steven feels much better now.
I'm a little tired of you guys telling me how I feel.
This all pays off by the end of the season, where Lapis sends a message down to Earth warning them that the Homeworld gems are coming, with Steven quite literally being stuck between the 2 different settings of the show, the gem stuff and the towny stuff. The penultimate episode's focusing on him trying to get the town ready for evacuation, teaching them to band together in times of crisis, giving somewhat of a neat little finale to the towny episodes. And the next showing these Homeworld gems coming down to Beach City inside a giant floating hand, revealing Peridot once again, with Lapis and newcomer Jasper, whose role is to kill all of the crystal gems. They try to use the laser light cannons from the second episode on it, which I think was a great touch to show how powerful Homeworld is. In that one, just a single cannon was able to destroy the threat of that episode. Yet here, 4 of them don't even put a dent on Homeworld. With the town all having to evacuate, that means Steven and his dad too. Which pisses him off as it still shows they don't see him as an equal, someone who could be an asset to the team. And I like that they give Greg a little moment here too, to express how he doesn't really want Steven doing all this stuff if it can mean he loses his son. But eventually, he trusts him enough to let him go back and help. Where once again the gems tell him to get out, resulting in what I believe to be the true payoff to the season.
Steven, get out of here!
No! I'm a crystal gem too!
The season never really had a focus on Garnet at all. And while I do like the actual finale and the song she sings and everything, I just never felt her moment had the same impact this does. The entire season has slowly been showing Steven resenting how the gems treat him like a child, and his inability to learn how to use his powers. So him saving them from a shattering blast with the use of his shield always comes off to me like the culmination of all that stuff. But yeah, no, the real finale has them up on the ship and it's revealed Garnet is actually a fusion of 2 other gems, which is a neat reveal, and it explains why she has 2 gems on her temple door and was so ecstatic when Steven and Connie fused together. But I love the ending, the cam after the storm. We're having this giant space-traveling life-or-death adventure, and watching Lapis and Jasper fuse only for the former to drag her into the ocean, Connie gives Steven a call asking what happened, once again dragging him back down to reality, that this is going to be the status quo from now on. Ending the season on the implication that the next is going to be much grander in scale. They didn't really live up to that, but hey, that's not what this is about. Overall, I just think that Season 1 of Steven Universe is without a doubt the most well-rounded season of the show, and I definitely don't agree with a lot of the community's assessment that a majority of it should be skipped. While it's certainly not perfect, me focusing on all the story moments neglects how many episodes truly are just kind of bad in my opinion, like Shirt Club or Winter Forecast or Fusion Cuisine. Most of the rest of the season is great, sometimes amazing. I hate this stigma we currently have around episodic cartoons, this strange belief that if something doesn't have an ongoing story then it's without merit. Current animation fans I feel have become way too obsessed with shows that slowly drip feed you bits of history over the course of 3 seasons, whether or not said lore is even any good. Sometimes a bit of episodic fun is needed, and I think Steven Universe's first season does an excellent job at balancing both. I briefly want to cover some of the other aspects of the series that's talked about a lot online, the main, of course, being the animation. Steven Universe has met with a lot of complaints over its approach to the character models, that being the animators are directed to follow the storyboards as closely as possible, with said storyboard artists not being restricted to staying super on model. Basically, if it looks like the character, then it is the character. And while, yeah, it does become a bit distracting at times, especially during early Season 1, Jesus, they could not agree on how big to make Pearl's fucking face.
Some of us are trying to protect humanity. Where were you?
Generally, I don't find it to be that much of an issue, but I love how expressive the characters can be, and whatever brush they use for the line art looks amazing, it's super clean. Also, generally, these more off-model scenes aren't relevant when talking about the more serious moments of the story. Like, sure, there are a few pretty bad cherry-picked examples where it looks pretty egregious, but I don't think there was ever a moment in the show where I was meant to take something seriously, but couldn't because of the visuals. The music and backgrounds add to this greatly. I love the pastel colors of Beach City that give it this laid-back vibe. You can tell the artists had a very specific place in mind that they were trying to replicate with this location, and it contrasts really well against the more dark and saturated colors used for the gem stuff. And this score is wonderful. I'm not a super big fan of how much chiptune is used, although that may simply be a result of how overdone it is now. But I also think it's because when they do use actual instruments, it works so well at adding such a theatrical feeling to the scenes they're used in. It's really one of the best scores I think from any cartoon in recent times. And with all this, I just ended the season wondering, why is this so hated? And then I realized that maybe it isn't really Season 1's fault. Well, I'm sure there are folks out there who just don't like this show because they don't like it, and that's fine, honestly, I get why you'd not like this. But maybe some of this hate comes from what the show became after all of this. Steven Universe fans don't like how much it flip-flops between the gem stuff they want to see and the town stuff they deem as filler. And Steven Universe haters don't like how it set the groundwork for the series to lean heavily into what they began setting up here in the future. Whatever the reason may be, all I can really say is, I like it. I like it a lot. And I'm happy to have been able to revisit this after so long. I probably would have went on making fun of the show, and honestly, maybe still will, it's very easy to do. But deep down, I'll always have a level of appreciation for Steven Universe. And maybe in the future I'll sit down and talk about the rest of the series at some point, who knows. Whoa boy, this is probably going to be my most controversial video yet. Either from fans who think I wasn't positive enough, or haters who think I wasn't negative enough. Either way, bye. Once again, I'd like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Squarespace gives folks a powerful online platform to create your own website, connect with your audience and generate revenue through gated members-only content, manage your members, send emails, and leverage audience insights, all in one easy-to-use platform. There's even a fully integrated comment system that supports comments, threads, and likes. Or check out the Squarespace extensions, third-party tools that help you manage inventory, promote products, streamline bookkeeping, reconcile and file sales tax, and ship items across the globe, as well as letting you display posts from your own social media profiles. Why wouldn't you want to use Squarespace? So go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/lsmark to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And thanks Squarespace for sponsoring this video.